In a very enigmatic passage in this week's Parshas, the Torah tells us about the Goel Hadam, the Redeemer of blood. What does that mean? Should a person happen to have murdered somebody else accidentally, the person is obligated to go to the Ir Miklat, the city of refuge, and he stays there until the death of the Kohen Gadol. What happens if the person leaves early? The Torah tells us that there is a person who is the Goel Adam, the Avenger of blood, who has the right to kill the person who had murdered his relative if he leaves that city. What a strange halacha. Revenge is such a despicable trait. Doesn't seem to be a Torah value. Why would the Torah assign a task of the Goel Hadam? But maybe it's not about revenge. There's a startling Gemara in Masei Sanhedrin. The Gemara tells us that what happens if a person dies who has no immediate relatives, has nobody to do the Goel Hadam? Let's say the person was a convert and has no halachic relatives. Says the Gemara, the Beis Din appoints a person to act as the Goel Hadam. The court assigns somebody with the task of chasing the murderer to the Ir Miklat and gives them the license to kill the accidental murderer if he leaves the Ir Miklat. Why? Why, if there's no blood relative who has that inclination naturally towards revenge, would the Torah deem it appropriate and necessary to give somebody else that job? What's so fundamental about the Goel Hadam? Clearly it's not about revenge. Or the Torah, the court, would not be obligated to find somebody else to fulfill that role. But if it's not about revenge, what is it? What's the message of the Goel Hadam? Everything that we see in life affects us, sometimes in more obvious ways than others. And being exposed to murder or violence often desensitizes us to the tragedy of the loss of human life. The Ohr HaChaim HaKadosh explains that the Torah tells us about the Ir HaNidachas, the horrible calamity, about the wayward city where everybody worshipped the Avodah Zarah and needs to be wiped out entirely. And the Torah promises that the person who fulfills this dictate, this mandate of the Torah, will have a bracha of rachamim, of mercy. What does that have to do with anything? What does that have to do with wiping out the city and getting the bracha of rachamim? The Ohr HaChaim HaKadosh says that person specifically needs a bracha of rachamim. And the Torah is saying, if you fulfill what is necessary and what is required, you will not be adversely affected. You won't be desensitized by the role that you played. The Sudeish explains that the purpose of the Goel Hadam is not to seek revenge, but rather it is part and parcel of the repentance, of the atonement process for this person who accidentally murdered another human being. He who has now seen death so up close, even if it was only accidental, may be slightly less sensitive to the value of life. So part of the job of the Ir Miklat is to give the person time to reflect and appreciate how special every single life is. And the Goel Hadam helps to put the person in that mindset. If I leave here, my life is in danger. It's a different perspective on the value of life. And a person appreciates every moment that he has. So yes, even if there is no blood relative, the court must appoint a Goel Hadam because it is part of the atonement process for this person. Like any other accidental murderer, he needs that frame of reference of the risk of leaving in order to appreciate how precious our lives are. We're so exposed in our lives to death and shootings and murder that we sometimes, Rahman al-Islam, become desensitized. But it's a terrible mistake on our parts. We have to appreciate every single life. We need to appreciate those heroic people who put their lives at risk to help other people, our soldiers in our Yisrael, our armed forces, whoever it may be. People that give us the ability to live our lives in safety. Every single life is precious. And appreciating the value of life certainly is part of this process of getting ready for Tisha B'Av, for the 9 days that are coming upon us. The problems of looking down or speaking badly of others come from a lack of understanding the value of another human being. But when we appreciate every person, every life, how special it is, then hopefully that can help us bring the achdus. If I understand how precious your life is, my life is, and all of us, then we can work together to hopefully bring the time when the Ir Miklat will again be functioning, when we have the Beis HaMikdash Sheibana b'mheira v'yameinu. Amen.